Israel has ramped up its airstrikes, hitting a Hamas command and control tunnel network in Gaza. An airstrike also leveled a Palestinian refugee camp, causing widespread casualties amid mounting suffering there. President Yoon once again made his case for the need to tighten the country's fiscal belt to improve the livelihoods of people in need. This as he talked more casually with ordinary citizens today at a town hall meeting. The nation's exports turned around in October to record an increase for the first time in over a year, backed by strong sales of ships and automobiles. This extended a trade balance surplus for the fifth straight month. It's November 1st, 2023. This is News Center.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. Israeli forces are ramping up their attacks on Gaza, which included a densely populated refugee camp causing widespread casualties. Israel says it has eliminated a top Hamas commander and took control of key Hamas positions. In the meantime, the ongoing strikes and operations have left some 10,000 people dead. Choi Min-jung leads us off.
Israeli forces continue their attacks on dense areas of Gaza. On Tuesday, the Israeli military announced that it had killed a top Hamas commander responsible for the October 7th attack on Israel in airstrikes targeting a refugee camp in Jabalia, Gaza. Hamas denied the claim, saying that none of the commanders were there on Tuesday. The Gaza Health Ministry, controlled by Hamas, said the strikes killed and wounded hundreds. The director of the nearby Indonesia hospital has said at least 50 people were killed. The Health Ministry spokesman said that the number of victims may be the largest witnessed in the war so far. As part of Israel's ground operation, the Israel Defense Forces said troops took control of Hamas's tunnels and rocket launching positions in the northern part of the Gaza Strip and killed over 50 terrorists. It also reportedly hit more than 11,000 targets in Gaza belonging to Hamas since the war began. The ongoing Israel-Hamas war has so far killed more than 10,000 people. According to Gaza's health ministry, at least 8,500 have been killed in Palestine. Among the dead are some 3,500 children, taking up more than a third of the death toll. According to Israeli officials, more than 1,400 people have been killed in Israel. Meanwhile, Qatar has reportedly mediated an agreement between Egypt, Israel, and Hamas in coordination with the U.S. to allow foreign passport holders and some severely injured people to move out of Gaza. Citing a relevant source, Reuters reports that the agreement would allow the people to cross the Rafah border between Egypt and Gaza. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
As the war between Israel and Hamas intensifies, civilians are the ones paying the price. People in Gaza are trying to find food and water all day long, and serious health and hygiene problems are becoming more common. Choi Soo-young reports.
Israel has imposed a complete blockade on Gaza since October 9th, increasing the intensity of its attacks, including retaliatory airstrikes and sending in ground troops, leaving those in the Gaza Strip in a desperate situation. According to the Wall Street Journal on Tuesday, following the imposition of the blockade, food and water are running out and hundreds of Gaza residents are starving as they desperately try to obtain essential food items such as bread and vegetables.
We hope that the shops will manage to maintain the essential food supplies, such as flour and cooking oil. We also need car parts and diesel fuel. Today, I had to travel a long way in an ox cart to buy flat bread, but got nothing.
The Gaza Strip used to depend on Israel and Egypt for most of its food. However, when Hamas won in the Palestinian Legislative Council elections in 2006, Israel imposed a partial blockade. As a result, over half of the Gaza population fell into poverty, and the recent war has pushed many into starvation. Israel has allowed a small amount of humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, but the UN World Food Programme estimates that this may only last for about 7 days. Furthermore, Israel has completely halted fuel supplies due to concerns about Hamas hijacking them for military use.
Due to the difficulty in finding transportation, as there are no cars because there is no diesel or gas, we are forced to ride a donkey cart because it is all that is available now.
Moreover, diseases such as skin infections and the emergence of head lice are spreading rapidly, leading to a public health disaster. According to the Middle East Monitor, schools and camps operated by refugee aid organizations are overcrowded because more than 15,000 Gaza residents are seeking refuge from Israeli airstrikes, causing serious life-threatening health and hygiene issues.
I am raising alarm about the possibly catastrophic consequences of large-scale ground operations in Gaza and the potential for thousands more civilians to die.
The Gaza Health Ministry said generators in the two main hospitals in Gaza will completely stop without essential fuel and electricity supplies, and there is a growing risk of infant mortality due to a lack of food and infrastructure damage from the fighting. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
U.S. President Joe Biden says that he will veto the Israel aid bill proposed by the House Republicans if it were to be passed. If passed, $14.3 billion in aid would be given to Israel, but none to Ukraine. Senators from both parties are voicing doubts about the bill, while the White House says the bill would be bad for Israel, the Middle East, and the national security of the United States. This is after Biden requested $106 billion in aid to Israel and Ukraine. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken will visit Israel again on Friday for meetings with the Israeli government, as well as making other stops in the region. And U.S. State Secretary Antony Blinken is planning to make a two-day visit to South Korea next week for the first time since President Yoon Suk-yeol took office. The Foreign Ministry announced that Minister Park Jin and Blinken will have talks next Thursday to discuss a range of issues from the ROK-U.S. alliance and tensions with North Korea to economic security and advanced technology. Also, the trip comes ahead of an expected meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping this month. The ministry expects the trip to become a milestone in bolstering the strategic partnership between Seoul and Washington as they mark the 70th anniversary of their alliance. As we just heard, U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping are to meet in San Francisco later this month. Eyes are on how they will manage their rivalry and competition at this juncture. Pei Eun-ji takes a look at what could be topping their agenda.
The White House has said President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping are expected to meet in November. A spokesperson confirmed in a White House press briefing on Tuesday local time that the two leaders are aiming to hold constructive talks.
It's going to be in San Francisco. It's going to be a constructive meeting.
Their summit is expected to be held on the sidelines of the APEC meeting in San Francisco, which will take place from November 11th to 17th. But China has not yet confirmed that Xi will be at the APEC meeting, and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi warned on Saturday that the road to talks is still not smooth. One expert says if the summit does take place, the two leaders will likely focus on economic issues, such as technology, trade, as well as semiconductors, a field South Korea is leading in.
South Korea dominates the chip market and we have a lot of production, so I think we should make use of them. And it could also be an opportunity to improve relations with China.
Meanwhile, Hong Kong said on Tuesday that its finance minister Paul Chan will attend the APEC meeting on behalf of its leader John Lee, a move seen to smooth over a diplomatically sensitive issue for both Beijing and Washington. Earlier in July, Beijing demanded that Washington invite Lee, who was under U.S. sanctions for his role in a political crackdown in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's latest decision comes just days after the Chinese foreign minister made a rare visit to Washington, where both sides agreed to work towards a summit between their presidents. Pei Eun-ji, Arirang News.
A day after his budget speech at the National Assembly, President Yoon Suk-yeol spoke about the country's economic situation and spending for next year as he met today residents from different backgrounds in a more casual way. There, he reiterated the goal of fiscal soundness to stabilize prices. Correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
President Yoon said cutting government spending was to stabilize prices, which ultimately will help the working and middle classes. This was his message on Wednesday as Yoon presided over the 21st Emergency Economic Meeting with 60 residents from all backgrounds and relevant ministers in a town hall setting at a cafe in Seoul's Mapogu district.
왜냐하면 이제 결국은 이제 돈이 든단 말이에요. 돈이 드는데 그 돈을 누가 부담할 거냐. 또 재정에서 이걸 쓰려고 하면 이게 이제 예산을 막 늘릴 수는 없잖아요. 예산이 막 정부 재정 지출이 팍팍 들어가면요. 물가가 오릅니다.
Also, citizens shared their hardships with the president, who listened and promised to consider their needs as he carries out his economic policies. One of them was a taxi driver who called out the nation's major taxi calling application Kakao Mobility, saying it was using its leverage to drive up the commission it charges drivers. President Yoon said this was in fact an unethical act by a monopoly and called on the relevant ministers present to come up with measures to stop this corporate behavior. Yoon also called out major banks for their monopolizing of the sector and not helping out small business owners. He said the banking system in South Korea has to be changed. As he spoke with the citizens, Yoon reflected on when he first jumped into politics after spending his career as a prosecutor. It's widely known that a shopkeeper from Mapogu district was one of the motivations for the transition he made as he saw how hard making a living was for the working class. Yoon spoke frankly of the hardships of the presidency, especially as the nation is in an era of political excess with resistance to budget reallocations.
이거를 어려운 서민들을 두툼하게 지원해주는 쪽으로 예산을 좀 재배치를 시키면 아우성입니다. 아우성이에요. 내년 선거 때 보자. 아주 탄핵시킨다. 뭐 이런 얘기까지 막 나옵니다.
Yoon also pledged that he would not prioritize political gain, even with the general election coming up in a few months, and take responsibility for all his actions. 김도현, Arirang News.
And President Yoon today vowed to allocate resources to childcare and remove factors that restrict women's active participation in society. This said during his congratulatory remarks at the 58th National Women's Convention held in Seoul. Encouraging women to continue taking active leading roles in society, Yoon highlighted that we must make great use of women's capabilities to make a new leap forward. The event, hosted by the Korean National Council of Women, focuses on promoting gender equality. President Yoon attended the event as a presidential candidate back in 2021. On the trade front, Korea's exports in October marked an on-year rebound for the first time in 13 months, thanks to greater shipments of automobiles and ships. This extended a trade balance surplus for the fifth straight month. Park Go-nu has latest numbers.
South Korea's exports for the month of October jumped 5.1% on year, reaching a new high for 2023. According to the Trade Ministry on Wednesday, this was the first time in 13 months that South Korea saw an increase in exports compared to the year before. The country's trade balance in October was in the black for the fifth consecutive month, with the export volume exceeding $55 billion and imports hovering under the $54 billion line for a surplus of some $1.6 billion. Robust exports were mainly attributed to the performance of core export items, including automobiles, general machinery, ships, and displays, which have all seen a jump for several consecutive months. The higher cost of petroleum products also pushed outbound shipments up for the first time in 8 months. Semiconductors, one of South Korea's largest export goods, saw a recovery last month as well, after a poor performance in Q1. By region, 6 out of 9 of Korea's major outbound shipping markets saw an increase in October. In particular, exports to the U.S. were highest for any October, mainly backed by electric vehicle exports. Total exports to the U.S. came to $10.1 billion, exceeding the $10 billion mark for the second consecutive month. Exports to China remained above $10 billion for the third straight month, while shipments to the ASEAN region were not just a new high in 2023, but also for any October on record. As for imports last month, due to higher prices for energy sources such as gas and coal, the figure shrank by over 9% year-on-year. Meanwhile, South Korea's trade minister stressed that recent export data is evidence of recovery, even in times of global uncertainty, including high interest rates and oil prices. He added that the government would do its very best to maintain this trend until the end of the year. Park Geon-woo, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, a coalition of countries, including South Korea, will seal a deal pledging not to pay ransoms to cybercriminals. This as the UN accuses North Korea of illegal funding its weapons programs through this means. Kim Jong-sil with the details.
40 countries, including South Korea and the US, plan to sign a pledge never to pay ransoms to cybercriminals. They're part of a US-led alliance that will also work toward eliminating the hackers' funding mechanisms. The White House announced a plan on Tuesday local time. The International Counter-Ransomware Initiative, a two-day event ending on November 1st, includes representatives from 48 countries, the EU, and Interpol. This is the third annual event that is being hosted by the US, which, according to the White House, is the country that has been hit hardest by cybercrime. It aims to eradicate the criminals' funding by sharing information, including the ransom payment accounts. The initiative comes as FBI Director Christopher Wray emphasized the risks of cyber attacks at Tuesday's U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. Wray said in the last few years, countries like China, North Korea, and Russia, quote, use cyber operations to target U.S. research. He also said cyber attacks by China, Russia, and Iran are becoming more aggressive and more capable than ever before. The FBI director said he's most worried that these adversaries focus on, quote, compromising U.S. critical infrastructure, especially during a crisis. In ransomware attacks, hackers hack into an organization's systems to steal information or encrypt data and demand ransom in exchange for unlocking it. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Korea has become a significant Indo-Pacific partner for Europe at a crucial time when conflicts are happening across the world. Now, this is according to a scholar of global affairs who believes Korea is capable of contributing broadly to tackling universal challenges. Oh Soo-young met up with him.
South Korea has grown as an important Indo-Pacific partner for European countries and a force for multilateral cooperation amid war and tensions across the world. That's according to Ramon Pacheco Pardo, a professor of King's College London who recently co-authored Korea, A New History of South and North. Speaking to Arirang News, Pacheco Pardo said the perception of South Korea has changed over the past year and a half, particularly among European governments, which are increasing their engagement in the Indo-Pacific to secure peace and development, where 60% of the world's maritime trade passes through. He said Seoul's surge of soft and material power in recent years has shown its growing capacity to contribute to resolving global challenges, looking beyond its own security interests on the Korean peninsula.
It's not only the demand for Korea to do more, but they believe that Korea has the economic resources, technological resources, diplomatic resources, and military resources, along with its soft power, to contribute more, to contribute to the provision of global goods, aid, for example, to developing countries. You also see, for example, when it comes to supply chains, diversification, or de-risking, as some people call it, away from China. Well,
the expert noted that Seoul was invited to the G7 and NATO summits for 2 straight years since 2023, with President Yoon pushing to bolster global solidarity and institutions to deter threats from North Korea, ensure peace and the rule of law in regional waters, stabilize supply chains, and support the green transition and global development. In particular, Seoul's trilateral cooperation with Washington and Tokyo, set out at the Camp David summit in August, is expected to become the driving force for building peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific.
I think it is necessary for Korea, Japan, and the US to make sure that they start implementing at least some of the deliverables from the Camp David statement as soon as possible, whether it's a dialogue, education program, whether it is the joint development of deterrence capabilities that they were talking about, for example, in the area of economic security.
But beyond trilateral efforts, multilateralism is crucial to keeping the momentum going, beyond political forces of change that may come as a result of key elections next year, particularly the US presidential race. Here, Pacheco Pardo said Seoul can play a crucial role in solidifying the network of like-minded partners, especially in maritime cooperation and high-tech areas like semiconductors, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity and space.
In terms of making this a success, I think it is necessary also to engage other partners. Of course, Korea, Japan and the US can do a lot together, but many of the areas they focus on, for example, economic security, for example, they do focus on the development of new technologies. You really need other partners. You need Europe, you need Canada, you need Australia, you need Taiwan as well.
Having held 142 summits with 93 countries so far, Yoon is set to engage with a number of European countries until the year end, in bilateral summits with the leaders of Ireland, the UK and the Netherlands. Osuyoung, Arirang News.
Mild autumn weather continues to prevail across the nation. Tomorrow, conditions will get even warmer. Seoul will see highs of 25 degrees Celsius. Other regions, such as Gyeongju, will see even warmer spells with highs of 28 degrees. With readings surpassing the norm significantly, wide temperature gaps are also expected. Make sure to dress in layers. Warm temperatures will trigger a greater influx of fine dust from overseas. For the morning hours, the Seoul metropolitan area and Gangwon-do province will see dust levels standing in the bad category. Strong winds are in the forecast from time to time and blowing dust across central parts of the country. This may reduce visibility, so please drive with extra caution. Morning temperatures will be starting off at 17 degrees in Seoul, Busan and Jeju at 16 degrees. And more sunshine will build up for the daytime. Daily highs in Seoul and Gwangju will get up to 25, Daegu 26, and Gyeongju will be very warm at 28 degrees. Showers are in the forecast this coming Friday, and they will last until the end of the weekend. After the rain, colder spells are expected. That's all for now, and to the weather conditions around the world.
And that is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? Welcome. 24시간 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Straight through my heart.
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world, like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city, transforming our world, navigating toward a better future.
The whole movie is basically just concentrated on real human emotions, not just love, not just friendship, but like everything.
Even for relationships that aren't focused romantically, I think it's very normal to have these type of ups and downs.
Korea hydro and nuclear power envisions a world flowing with energy as clean as the blue skies, where we can enjoy energy without worrying about the planet by finding new alternative sources to achieve carbon neutrality through clean, carbon-free energy. KHNP is creating a new future for a carbon-free world. Korea hydro and nuclear power.
Children's laughter, hope, dream. K-animation belongs in them. Interesting and valuable story that transcends between everyday life and dream. Surprising spectacle where imagination becomes real. An array of subjects catering from infants to adolescents. For our story to reach all corners of the world. K-animation makes healthy laughter for children.
Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. After China's foreign minister recently made a rare visit to Washington, the White House confirmed that U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping are to meet on the sidelines of the APEC summit in San Francisco. If the summit does take place, it will be the first one since a meeting in Bali last November. But what would be discussed during the summit? And if the U.S. and China get to reboot their ties, how does this affect tensions on the peninsula? For this, we have invited Dr. Ko Myung-hyun, a senior fellow from the ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Go, welcome.
It's nice to be here.
Thank you for being with us. And we also have Shreyas Reddy, correspondent at NK News Seoul. Good to have you with us, Shreyas.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now, first question to our Dr. Go. So before we tap into the promise of a Biden-Xi summit, I'd like to ask you for some background information. The leaders met at a G20 summit last year in November. What was discussed there, and how have the bilateral ties have been up until now?
So the last summit in Bali, last year's Xi Biden summit in Bali was more of an occasion for United States and China to set essentially a floor to the intensifying friction between the two major powers. Remember last year, there's a very intense pressure on the part of the United States, especially with the economic security measures targeting China's semiconductor industry. In October last year, United States passed a very stringent measures to limit the transfer of technology and then skilled personnel that could facilitate China's achievement in achieving high level of semiconductor production, and then there are other measures such as like a freedom of navigation operations in Taiwan Strait that put pressure on China militarily as well. So there was this concern that the two major powers, they were essentially there's a risk that these two major powers might actually clashing with each other, within near future. So the summit in Bali serves as an occasion for the two countries to tone down the friction and as well as set some guidelines on how they would manage the potential conflicts that could emerge in the meantime. And then one of the major communication that emerged from that was that essentially the both sides agreed to disagree on some major points such as the Taiwan issue as well as the technological competition, but at the same time they agreed that they would work together in lowering the tension in the Korean Peninsula as well as cooperating with each other when it comes to limiting the downside effect of climate change. So in that sense, it's a very constructive event, because at the moment there's this concern that the major powers, they were essentially on a clash course. But then things have improved since quite a bit since then. So there's been a change in discourse on the part of the West, not just the United States, but the European countries. They try to change their narrative about China. So overall, there's a more cautious optimism about the prospect of improving the bilateral relations between the United States and China.
All right, I see. Well, Shreyas, after months of diplomatic maneuvering to improve ties, Washington and Beijing finally agreed that they're going to have a summit in San Francisco this month. Against what backdrop do you believe the two leaders agreed to have this summit?
Well, I think, of course, as Dr. Yo pointed out, these are the two major powers in the world at the moment, and certainly for the last 2 years, they have been competing or they've had a rivalry of sorts as they compete for influence across the world. And in the years since that Bali summit, there have been other ups and downs as well. Earlier this year, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken cancelled a planned China visit after alleged Chinese spy balloons were spotted over the U.S. mainland. Since then, things have normalized a little more. Blinken visited China. Other Chinese and U.S. officials have made visits to the other countries and to the other side in the meantime. And on the whole, at the moment, the rivalry still does exist. There will still be differences and major disagreements on a lot of aspects as the two countries side take different sides on different issues, including Taiwan is a persistent issue, Russia, Ukraine, North Korea, of course. But as Dr. Go said, there is a chance now for further dialogue, further diplomacy, and for them to find common ground on various topics.
Right, I see your point. Now, Dr. Go, I'd like to tap on several agendas that could be discussed, and among them will almost certainly be export controls, as both countries tighten their export controls on either technology or crucial raw materials. Do you believe the economic tension would be able to be thawed?
So I think Well, we are cautiously optimistic that will be the case, especially because Korea benefits from stable economic relations between China and the United States. But at the same time, on a more pessimistic note, I think the United States is very much consistent when it comes to applying pressure on China and also as imposing an upper bound to how much China can develop its key emerging technological sectors, especially concerning the semiconductors as well as the artificial intelligence. And so I think the export control measures that we have seen since last year, since October last year especially, will remain in place. But what's going to change is the tone of the discourse about China. I think the Chinese have been very, I would say, concerned about the radicalization of the American discourse about China's role in the world. So that was the motivation behind the so-called decoupling from China. But at the same time, it would be impossible to decouple from such a major economic powerhouse such as China. So that's the reason why, since the G7 meeting in Hiroshima earlier this year, the West, so to speak, the European countries and the United States, as well as Korea and Japan and Australia and New Zealand, these countries shifted the focus of the China policy from decoupling to de-risking. So what it means is, instead of focusing on China as an entity, all other countries that trade with China would focus more about having more of a stable supply chain, diversifying their source of critical materials such as critical minerals and high-tech components, and then at the same time, essentially, through diversification, stabilize any kind of political risk that could emerge between China and the United States. So in that sense, the focus is no longer about China or trying to paint China as a threat. It's more about the system itself. So I think this is something that China finds constructive, and I think this is going to be repeated over and over again as an achievement in the upcoming APEC summit meeting between the two leaders. But having said that, I think there are a lot of outstanding issues that the two major powers could work very closely together. There's North Korea, obviously, but it's kind of fading into the background. But there's the issue of Ukraine and more fresh source of conflict, which is the Middle East. So I think China has a role now in the Middle East, and I think the United States would like to see China to have a more of a constructive role there too.
Right. Dr. Goh, since you have already mentioned about the war in the Middle East region, the U.S. could urge Beijing to play a more conciliatory role because of its strong ties with Arab states. How does each country's view of the matter differ, and do you believe China will be able to take this role as a mediator?
So China is a new player in the Middle East. Historically, the Middle Eastern countries, except for Iran, maintain very strong ties to the United States. But China has emerged as a new player because essentially it's the biggest consumer of the Middle Eastern product, which is petroleum. So that has given China leverage with the major oil exporters in the region. But then when it comes to the understanding or depth of a relationship, it's not really about China and the Arab states, but then more about China and Iran, which is not an Arab state, it's a Persian state. But then Iran is essentially a spoiler right now in the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine. Iran maintains very strong ties, not just with Hamas, but also with Hezbollah. So I think this could be a reason why the United States is reaching out to China, because the United States has already very strong communication channels with the Arab states, especially in the Gulf area, but then doesn't have that level of communication or dialogue with Iran. So China can step in, and then there's an incentive on both sides to manage the situation in the Middle East, because no one wants the major regional conflict breaking out or escalation at this moment. So I think that's the reason why we are cautiously optimistic that there could be some possible contribution from China for the stabilization of the situation in the Middle East.
Right, so China could step in the region.
Exactly.
All right, I see. Well, sure, issues related to North Korea will also be on the list. And though China seemed to be quite distancing itself from strengthening ties between Russia and North Korea, some say Beijing having forcibly repatriated hundreds of North Koreans back to the north from South Korea to cooperate with Pyongyang. What's your view on this?
Well, there are a couple of sides to this issue. One is, of course, the larger picture of China's relations with North Korea and Russia in an increasingly polarized world. There will be some issues where China will back them on the global stage. There will be some issues where it disagrees. But when it comes to the repatriation of North Korean defectors, this is actually very consistent with has been concerned, North Korean defectors have in China, in Chinese territory, it has always viewed them as illegal migrants and has certainly in the past cooperated with North Korea to send them back. It's just that now we're seeing it in large numbers after almost 4 years of border closures in North Korea. So that is perhaps why it's getting so much attention, so much focus right now. But this has been the case for a while. Even the 2014 UN Commission of Inquiry report on North Korean human rights effectively said that China plays a big role in sending North Koreans back to China. It monitors them. They do not really have rights there. If it finds any, it often informs the North Korean authorities and helps and gives them a chance to recapture the defectors, and also makes it very hard for them to escape to other countries, something that has become increasingly difficult in the last few years between the pandemic and increasing surveillance. So it is a sad state of affairs in many ways, but essentially this is still consistent with how China has treated the North Korean defector issue for a long time.
Right, so China was just sticking to its long-term policy. Right, I see. Well, Dr. Go, before I wrap up this discussion over Biden-Xi summit, if the Biden-Xi summit serves as an opportunity to, improve their ties and reboot their ties, how does this affect the tension on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, it's overall going to be positive, but then whether it's going to have a significant impact in the prospect of improving inter-Korean relations, I have my doubts about it. North Korea has been doubling down its investment or betting on perfecting its nuclear capability. North Korea has a very clear roadmap for becoming a nuclear armed state. He wants to achieve a massive production of nuclear weapons, and this can be done with or without tension between United States and China. So I think this is a goal that the North Koreans are clinging on to. So I don't think it's going to change their minds. But at the same time, it could have an impact on the trend of provocation on the part of North Korea. There's this concern that North Korea could carry out a seventh nuclear test, and that could be a major red line, not just for the United States, South Korea, and Japan, but also for China. And North Korea knows that. So North Korea might think that if China and the United States get too close, and then they think it's a risk because China might enforce sanctions more strictly, then North Korea might be a spoiler again by carrying out a test or provocation that irritates not just Washington but also Beijing. And another wild card here is Russia. Russia is very committed to being anti-American and anti-Western as long as the war in Ukraine continues. And then they might think it's probably a good idea to broaden the front from Europe to Asia to distract the United States away from Ukraine. So there are all these factors that are working independent of relationship between China and the United States. So that putting all this together, the picture is definitely mixed about whether the improved bilateral relations between the United States and China could lead to stabilization in the Korean Peninsula.
Right, I see. Well, Dr. Go, that makes me wonder. So we have been talking about impact on the peninsula, but how about if the North Korea strengthens ties with Russia much more? I mean, I've just seen an article that it could provide more weapons to Russia. In that case, how China's position change?
So China, I think it's trying to find this perfect spot, so to speak, between having Russia and North Korea distracting the United States away from itself and perhaps the Middle East, and also weakening the U.S. presence in Asia. But at the same time, it doesn't want this newly found tightening of relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang to get out of control, for instance. Maybe Russia giving too much confidence to Kim Jong-un to carry out a very severe and serious provocation against U.S. allies or the United States itself. So China has to manage this relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang. But I think so far it's within the manageable zone for China. So I think China is probably secretly pleased that the North Koreans and the Russians are doing a job that China doesn't dare to because being watched too closely by the United States and its allies. But then if the heat gets too hot, then I think then that's when China is going to step in and receive the prestige and the attention as the mediator or broker and for stability in the region. So I think China is confident that they can manage the situation here.
All right, I see your point. Well, shifting gears a little bit here, she is. Last Tuesday, if I'm correct, a group of 4 individuals from North Korea arrived to South Korea through an eastern port city called Sokcho and expressed their intent to defect. And as far as I know, this was the first time since November 2019 when a group of North Koreans came to South Korea on a vessel through the East Sea. Is this a rare case?
Well, such defections across the sea aren't unheard of, but also they're not particularly common, I think. But at the same time, it is, of course, the crossing by water presents fewer clear obstacles than, let's say, running across the DMZ. So in terms of Korea to Korea defections, this is an avenue that has existed for a while. But there aren't, the cases are few and far between. For example, you mentioned, of course, 2019 was the last time they came across from the eastern side. On the other hand, but earlier this year, just I think it was in May, some defectors also came across from the western coastal border. So effectively, there are these kinds of cases do happen from time to time, but on the whole, they tend to be rare. Most defectors tend to cross over into China from North Korea and from there make their way to other countries, usually through Southeast Asia, before ending up in South Korea, despite, of course, the risk of repatriation by China that we discussed earlier.
Right. Well, Dr. Go, this incident raised concerns over possible lapses in the South Korean military's maritime surveillance, as it could not initially detect the boat crossing over the northern limit line. Is this concerning?
So I wouldn't be too concerned. The reason is because we're talking about a very small wooden boat, and it has all the characteristics and properties about low detectability or stealthy object. So essentially the maritime surveillance consists of either radars or visual monitoring, and depending on the weather conditions, it may be easy or not difficult to detect this kind of incursion by a wooden boat has stealthy characteristics. Or same with the radar, if there's a high waves, it's really difficult to detect such a low-profile object in the rough seas. So in that sense, I think it's not like there's been lapses on the part of the Korean military. It's more about it demonstrated the limitation to the current technology to surveil and monitor maritime borders. But at the same time, the implication is only become serious if the North Korean military might think that this is a potential way to send their agents or operatives to the south without being detected. But then if you put in the North Korean shoes, this method of sending valuable, highly trained agents or wooden boats in the rough seas is very dangerous. So, yeah, and then we know that there are instances where the Korean military was successful in detecting this kind of wooden boats before. So if we think that we estimate the chance of success to be 50%, I think it's a very low, I think that the North Korean military, despite their characteristic risk-taking patterns, will be hesitant to send their valuable assets to the south using this method. So I'm not too concerned about this.
Right, so we don't have to be worried about it too much.
Exactly.
All right. Well, it sure is. I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into the figures of defectors. According to the government data, 139 North Koreans defected to South Korea in the first 9 months of this year, and this is triple figure from a year earlier. Why is such an increase?
Well, I think the first thing, of course, is to allow for a little perspective on what we're comparing it to. So, for example, obviously this is a big change from last year and the year before that when, thanks to COVID, it became increasingly difficult for, or nearly impossible even, for defectors to cross over not only from North Korea to China, but from China to anywhere else, because China had very strict border controls and surveillance of its own during the pandemic. So, as China has eased borders since last year, it has at least given them a bigger and more of an opportunity to move across. But at the same time, it is hard to attribute it to any particular factor. Even the Unification Ministry, when it released the figures, said that there could be various factors that account for these. But one particular, or at least a combination of factors that may be involved in this is partly the fact that many of these defectors seemingly came from China, some of them even are. So because of the eased border controls, but for many of the long-term ones, it was also a motivation, perhaps because of the threat of repatriation to North Korea, as they found that despite living there in China for a decade, their place might be in danger. Better to move on, even if they had a comfortable life there.
Sure. What was more interesting to me about this tally was that more women defect to South Korea than men. Is there any specific reason behind this?
Well, this has long been the case. Typically about 70% or three-quarters roughly of defectors tend to be women, and there has never been a clear consensus on why this is the case, but there are many theories. One is in terms of the roles men and women occupy in North Korean society. Men are often more embedded in the organizational structure, undergo long periods of military service, so it may be harder for them to actually escape, while women perhaps tend to be almost overlooked at times, so they end up a little more independent, a little more likely to take up their own path. And in one particular case situation is that particularly since the famine of the 90s, North Korean women have increasingly stepped up as the ones who manage their households, the breadwinners. Often they take part in North Korea's informal private market economy. And so many of them are also more aware of what life is like on the outside, or at least by North Korean standards, and they may find out, oh, we have an opportunity to head to China or some other country to earn more money, whether it's temporarily with the intention of coming back or permanently, as in many cases. So that is a big factor. Some other theories suggest that they may simply be looking to escape the patriarchal and autocratic North Korean society, while others may have motivations such as getting their family, their children to safety.
Right, interesting. Well, Dr. Go, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask you this last question. Ursula has already told us one of the reasons for this increase in the number of defectors, but the Unification Ministry pointed out the increase of this number shows the chronic food shortages that North Korea is going through right now. I mean, it's not surprising, but how serious do you believe it is?
So, I mean, the North Korea clearly suffers from these structural food deficits, and in that sense, it's a permanent situation. So it's not surprising that there are reports of food shortages taking place in some parts of the country. But then what's new here is that these defections, if indeed driven by a shortage in food production, it's taking place in autumn, late autumn, which is the harvest season in Korea. And the North Korean media had claimed that they enjoyed bumper harvest this year. So in that sense, we shouldn't be seeing this kind of defections taking place at this point with the year. And so that's the reason why I think the Unification Minister is pointing out that the food situation is more acute than we had estimated. So I think earlier next year, when it's clearly a time when there are food shortages, and I think we're going to see possibly more defections where people are really risking their lives to get to a safer place.
All right, I see. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Go, as always.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Shiraz, for your time and insights as well. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
해외에서 경기가 있을 때마다 스스로 다짐하는 말이 있어요. 나는 대한민국을 대표하는 선수이기 전에 대한민국 국민이다. 해외에서 자부심을 갖는 가장 좋은 방법은 재외선거를 놓치지 않는 거죠. 인터넷으로 쉽고 간편하게 신고 신청할 수 있는 제22대 국회의원 재외선거.